Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tahirin. Wa salamu taslima. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is our third lesson of Kalam. Just find the lesson here. This is lesson 3 of Theology 1. In this lesson, we are going to discuss the argument for the prime mover or unmoved mover. Prime mover. This argument says that all things in the world are moving. This is true when we consider things as they are themselves. If we look around at the world around us, we see that things are moving. Things are changing. Change is a kind of motion as well. We find them in change, development, progress, and transformation. Things are moving, they are not fixed, they are not stable in non-motion. Something that is stable or static is something that is not moving, not changing. Things are rather here in this world, they are in motion. And there's different kinds of motion, which we won't discuss at these levels. But motion doesn't always require some kind of time or things of that. But regardless, things are moving. They are not fixed in non-motion. If they were fixed in non-motion, there would be no development. There would be no progress. We find that since all things are set in a kind of motion, that is all created things, that now we must ask ourselves some questions. First, how are things in motion? When we ask how are things in motion, we would discover someone had to have set them in motion. If I throw a ball, the ball does not throw itself. I had to throw the ball. Someone had to throw the ball for it to be in motion. Because something which is in motion needs a push to cause its motion. Now we understand that there must be a cause initiating the motion. Then we must ask who initiated that motion? Who caused things to move? Because now we know that things need a mover. That when something is in motion, it implies that there must be a mover. But now, who did that? Who caused it to move? We have to ask. We have some options about who is prime. Prime means first. We now have a few options now that we have established that there must be something which pushes the moving things into motion. Our first option is beings or existence in motion themselves did it themselves. This is called an infinite loop. Infinite loop. An infinite loop is like a circle of causes, which would end up in motion itself causing motion. which is absurd, because how can something give motion to something when it has needed motion from something else, until eventually reaching the point of motion which it previously did not have, which would then be the cause of motion. This is intellectually absurd. Therefore, since intellectual logical loop is absurd and invalid, this option is invalid. To clarify this point, let us imagine that A here signifies motion. And we say a cause before it and a loop caused it, then before it and a loop caused it, and so on, so on, so on, so on, so on, till it caused itself. But A never had motion to cause itself to have motion. So this is invalid. It's absurd. Our second option, now that we have invalidated the first option, our second option is that the primum movens, or the primus mobile, or the prime mover. Mobile is like one who can move, so this is incorrect here. We mean prime mover. So that the prime mover is one that moves that is prior to the first mover. So our second option is that the prime mover is the mover that is prior to the first mover. Then the cause of that mover is the cause of that mover, and so on and so on. This is called indefinite, or this is called infinite regression, or endless chain. Infinite regression, or endless chain. Tasalsul. Such a thing is impossible, because this entire chain of infinite causes goes on forever, regardless of the fact that they have some kind of motion as well. So how could they be the first giver of motion when they got motion from the other? Because they were previously stable. Therefore, infinite regression is impossible, because any line must have a prior posterior point. So an example of this argument is, say we have a line. Motion is represented by this B. Then we have A here, and A here causing. It never ends. Even I can't fit it on the screen. It would never end. It would go on forever. Infinite. Back forever. That's impossible. Any line must have a starting point. Any line requires a prior point. And then it continues to B. So let's look at this measure. This is an example of a line. A signifies the beginning of the line, the prior point, and B signifies the posterior point. So intellectually, a line must have a beginning and an end. This example above is called a line. Any line or chain requires a prior point, represented by A, and a posterior point, represented by B. Therefore, to have an endless line is absurd, because it must end somewhere. However, if we assume there was a big endless line of causes, something had to be above that body of endless causes that caused them to exist. So let's just assume that there is an infinite body of lines, an infinite group of causes. What caused that infinite group? So let's just assume there is. Well, if we assume there is, then there must be something outside of it that caused it. Therefore, the need for a final mover or a final cause becomes evident. Now our third option. What is our third option? Our third option is as follows. Therefore, our third option is that there is by intellectual necessity has to be a cause that is necessary. This is the prime mover, or primum movens, the one who sets in motion all things moving or causes all effects. Contingency argument. The contingency argument causing about the contingent existence we'll discuss later, and the causality argument we'll discuss later, inshallah. So that prime mover, that unmoved mover, is the one who causes things to be set in motion from the very start of things, and that is the exalted Creator. So we know now, we've answered some questions that we had. We said we found that things are in motion and change and transformation. These are types of motion. And that since things are in motion, we need to know why they're in motion. When we ask why they're in motion, we find that something had to push them into motion. Then now we have another question. Who did that? Who pushed these things into motion? And now we have an idea in the mind that we had to find who it was. Was it the things in motion themselves? No, can't be, because infinite loop is impossible. Is it an infinite chain of causes? So no, it can't be, because intellectually an infinite chain must end somewhere, and there must be a necessary cause that initiates it. Therefore, we were left only with one intellectual option, and that was that there is a necessary mover who caused the motion to happen, who is unmoved. So this was the argument of unmoved mover or prime mover, and we wanted to discuss a little bit about this argument before ending our lesson, because this lesson was a bit philosophical, so you should look for its points and ask questions, etc. So Aristotle, or in English Aristotle, by definition and history, the prime mover is that which moves without being moved, so it causes other things to move. This argument originated with Aristotle, or Aristotle, and is a famous argument for the existence of God. Aristotle lived in the 4th century BCE. So he lived over 2,400 years ago, and is known in Islamic philosophy as Mu'allim al-Awwal, the first teacher, because he was seen as more introductory to the higher levels of knowledge. So they called him Mu'allim al-Awwal, so that way you would know that you go to him first and learn from him, and then you could go to the higher levels. So this was our lesson on prime mover, and we are going to end our class. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.